Okay. Let me stop sharing my screen with you, RJ, so you guys can go ahead and get
That was a
started.
funky new theme. I felt like I was in a 1980s science fiction.
Well, there you go. I mean, I always like to play
Felt
cool
like I was in
music.
an
So.
old club.
All right. Well, y'all have fun. Take it away, RJ.
Yeah, yeah. I was boogieing there, and that's a tragic thing to see. Old RJ trying to boogie. That's not. Just block that out of your imagination. We've got a packed show today. Colton, we'll get to you in just a moment. I had a strange request from a viewer from Finland. Wow, from Finland. Wow. Wanted to know more about my library. I was pointing out that the things behind me are not books, they're CDs from decades and decades and decades. They're primarily classical music things, but I didn't have a little portable camera to cart around with. So I decided to just bring up, I've mentioned a variety of technical works and things that I've discussed, Irwin and Valentine's book on the Cambrian and all that. But I thought I'd like to show briefly the wider world of the weird RJ. One of my interests from way, way back would be the game of tarot by Dummett, Michael Dummett. That's the complete catalog. You want to talk about thick books? This is a complete cataloging of all of the known tarot games. This was done way back in the 1970s. He's actually like a philosophy guy whose interest is the history of playing cards. And so he cataloged all of that. And it was that permitted me to put a tarot game in, dun, dun,
Sorry.
dun, shameless plug, the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, which Colton has an illustrated edition of on his little secret plate. And so that was some of the things. I collect playing cards. I was really lucky to have gotten the reproductions of almost all the major historic playing cards that came out in the 70s and 80s. So I got like hundreds of them that I had collected. That is like a museum down in my basement. Speaking of games, I was also fascinated by historic games in general, and a wonderful little book, Finkel's thing on games. You actually can play these because they've got the different pieces in them, the ancient Egyptian and Babylonian games and others that go back thousands of years. You can get apps for this, by the way. In fact, Irving Finkel, you can see a little lecture on YouTube that he did with the BBC a few years back, where he was talking about how neat the Royal Game of Ur is. And I downloaded the app for it, and it's an absolutely fascinating backgammon style game that long predates backgammon. And so that's another little interest of mine. And then in my automobile world, I was always fascinated with the history of car design and how automobiles came to be the way they are. I was in the Spokane and Ontario, California, were in the backwater of motoramas. So even though these things were in existence, where they would drag around all these styling cars that Harley Earl and all the others did for styling cues for the cars of the future. It never got within not my neighborhood. The only time I ever ran into any of these things was like at the Seattle World's Fair or seeing pictures and things in magazines and that. So that's a slight indication to show that RJ has some interests beyond that of saying snarky things about creationists and Donald Trump in kind of equal balance these days. So the main topics are, of course, the Replacing Darwin book that a certain person sent me at one stage, a different book, and now and then Jackson got me the copy of Replacing Darwin, and to find out that Colton has it as well, that we can all kind of be on the same field on that. By the way, Colton, you and Dapper Dino, who is in the live feed, he's watching the show, pointed out that you both had copies of Duane Gish's Evolution, the Fossils Still Say No. And you were kind of pining for the fact that you didn't have his older versions of those. Let me save you the trouble. You have the Mount Olympus, the holy grail of stupid, that all Gish did was recycle the older material in his earlier books. He's like a 1970s edition, a 1980s edition. He retitled some of it and so forth and so on. So the 1995 one is his pinnacle. And there in front of you is all the monumental stupid that you could possibly require. Plus, if you can get his Creation Scientists Answer Their Critics book from 1993, then you have the trifecta vice, because that's his other big work in the period. And you can see a lot of the stuff in my Dinomania chapter, where I compared the version of things like Proto-Avis, Jackson, Proto-Avis and others in the 93 book versus what he said in the 95 book. And Evolution Slam Dunk, I was able to draw on stuff that I knew he knew because he brought it up in the 93 book, but didn't talk about it in the 95 book regarding the reptile mammal transition. And so there's just this layer on layer of stuff on there. But yeah, the fact that you've got that 95 book, and you'll be able to find virtually all of the technical citations on that available. That wouldn't have been the case when I was looking at the thing cold back in the 1990s, back in the ancient days. Yes, we just had musical accompaniment going on in here. So,
sorry, that's my game.
Yeah, mute yourself, Tornado. We've got the material on Jensen. I was finally, as I mentioned in my mea culpa from last week, that I looked at the wrong bloody footnote in his book. Now I'm actually into footnote number 9, and it's this footnote number 9. That's a Beatles joke. Anyway, there's this monstrous mass of references that he has to document the chromosome history issue, and a lot of them are really old stuff from Thomas Hunt Morgan in 1910, which, by the way, you can find online.
Like,
yeah, that's
pre-genetics, like that.
Right. But some of the ones I'm going, do you really want to bring this up? Because one of them was a 2002 analysis on Crow by Crow, one of whose authors, Crow and Crow, was James Crow, the guy that Jeffrey Tompkins misrepresented. So I'm going to be seeing whether or not he brings that up later on in the story. I doubt it. And another one was by, of all people, Randy Moore from 1999. He's knee deep in the National Center for Science Education. This is bringing up a bunch of issues about how difficult it was to work out how chromosomes worked, how difficult it was to figure out what exactly was pulling apart during meiosis and all of that, you know, and which stage was doing what, and that there were a lot of errors that were going on because people were guided by what they were expecting. Their microscopes weren't accurate enough, and so forth and so on. So these were all papers where, is he really wanting to bring these issues up to remind us about how hard it is to do the real science, and then for us to turn around and go, Jensen, are you doing any of the science? So I put the links up to the ones that were
he made a graph
available.
Once, RJ.
Yeah, that's so,
man.
By the way, also, I found that Erica had referenced Evograd's analysis of Jensen, so I downloaded all that material, and I'll be plowing through that. Some of he was keeping that as a multi-year project of plowing through the Jensen book. And our little snot-nosed Standing for Truth, also, he had a thing, Debunking Rational Mind, aka Evograd blog, on that very point as well. So I'll be looking through his analysis and how he
The guys who can't read charts are going to debunk a evolutionary biologist. I'm sure that'll be fun.
one that jumped right out at me. I didn't put a link up on this. I can do it in some later thing. I'll probably, when we get around to more of the details of it. But one of the things that piqued my curiosity, he has a dates for mitochondrial Eve in here, and he has a chart of all of these things with just references. 1996, 8,100 years old, Howell et al. 1997, 11,800 years old, Mum et al. Without ever telling you what the references are. That sounds like standing for truth.
She's about about what, 200,000 years or
but one of them jumped right out at me. 1996, 6,000 years old, Ann Gibbons et al. Well, I knew exactly which one that was. That was the Ann Gibbons commentary on the Parsons paper from 1997, and it was being misrepresented by Tompkins in his book, which we drew attention to in our book. So. So I'll be following through to find out how many of the references in Standing for Truth and Raw Matt's criticism are actually ones that show up in the Jensen book after I've constructed the reference bibliography. By the way, we're out around page 27 or so, and he's getting up to one whole reference per page average.
Doesn't it not have an index either?
Oh, I'm just giddy. Yeah, there's no index. There's no bibliography, so I'm constructing a reference bibliography as I did.
RJ, how are you getting through that many sources?
I know. Oh gosh, I'm just a dither and a gog. It's just so taxing.
To be fair, I think Bill Nye's book Undeniable also lacks an index.
Oh yeah, he didn't have any. He would diddly squat. That's why it's just fluff.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, what?
Once in a while, you can read a work by a scientist that doesn't actually have references in it because it's deliberately aimed for a popular audience, but they offer the clues and an internal discussion that allows you to kind of check up on it.
To be fair, he's only a science guy.
Yeah, he's the science guy. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a little bit on that. We want to have our big discussion of a thing. I had a totally different thing planned for part 2 of the show until flames burst forth from Colton about, we got to talk about this week. So I bumped all of that over to a future week and tweak it into this. So here's what we're talking about here. For those of you who have read our little tome, the rocks were there. And for those of you who don't get it, we can use the money. Anyway, we brought up the issue of the Whopper Sands, which is a quite recent claim that's made by Tim Clarey at Institute for Creation Research, that the fact that there are salt deposits and things in the Caribbean Sea is proof of the flood, when we were able to find out, no, actually, it's an example of one of these things where the land has gotten scrunched in, and so you have less water coming in and it dries down and you have desiccation, not unlike the Messinian salinity crisis in the Mediterranean Sea. So we had a big section on this, 2 or 3 pages that we covered in the rocks were there. And then it turns out, the gift that keeps on giving, Tim Clarey just can't resist diving into it again. And so Colton brought to our attention this Paleogene drawdown in the Gulf of Mexico that was alluded to by a Whopper mystery for nearly 20 years, Tim Clarey's April 22nd, 2020 post, hot off the presses. So we put the link up to that and the paper that Cassi wrote in 2019, which went into the geological details of things. And my short summary when I did the fact checking, because I don't trust anybody, even you, Colton, I want to look up the primary sources anyway. And it turns out, my gosh, this is even juicier than you thought, because it was a clear example of Clarey utterly stampeding across the data field that was being brought up in this relatively short summary of what the state of the science was and what was going on. But that Cassi paper and the material that came up on that, Clarey can't possibly admit he wasn't aware of it because it was brought up explicitly in his one and only technical source. So with that as a preference, Colton, have at it.
Yeah. So That is a basic summary. When you're dealing with this Whopper Sands deposit in the Gulf of Mexico, um, the basic hypothesis that's being proposed by people like Rosenfeld is that the Mediterranean pushed up close against Florida, and it basically sealed off
Cuba.
the Gulf of Cuba. Pushed
the
up
Mediterranean
against Florida.
That would be an amazing phenomenon.
Sorry,
that would be fantastic.
Caribbean, that area. It basically blocked off the Gulf of Mexico. And so the Gulf of Mexico now was no longer connected to the Atlantic Ocean, and evaporation took over and started lowering the water column inside the Gulf of Mexico, which would allow sand to be transported further out into where the deeper water used to be, and that would allow for the Whopper Sands to be deposited. Well, Clarey, oh boy, oh man, it was bad. So he describes the basic scenario decently well. It's just copy and pasted from his one source. And here's how he describes the scenario. He calls it an outlandish solution and claims let me
read his paragraph, because this is juicy. To try and explain this in his uniformitarian worldview, Rosenfeld proposes a rather outlandish solution. He suggests that the Gulf of Mexico became isolated from the Atlantic Ocean and that sea level in the Gulf subsequently dropped over 6,000 feet, allowing sand to be transported into the remaining deepest sectors. And he tries to justify his explanation using evidence of erosional canyons along the continental shelf edges and by comparison to the Mediterranean Sea. But erosional canyons on the shelf edges are a global phenomenon, and the Mediterranean has a thick Miocene salt layer, whereas the Gulf has none at the level of the Whopper Sand. Uniformitarian scientists cannot argue for massive evaporation and sea level drawdown without some evaporation evidence like salt.
Well, so how true is any of that? None of it. So it turns out, he's not wrong. Erosional canyons on the continental shelves are a common phenomena. But these canyons have different features. They tend to be very steep-walled and cut through lithified Cretaceous rock instead of being slumped and V-shaped like a lot of the erosional canyons cut into the soft shelf are from like the last ice age. So that was one
soft granite.
Oh no, we're not going into that today. But to claim
it was in the putty state.
But to claim that this was one of their only pieces of evidence was completely wrong, and Clarey's own source explained why, because they gave several pieces of evidence of a wide range of erosional features in today's deep water which must have formed in subaerial conditions. That's a direct quote. What did they find? Well, for example, they found subaerial sinkholes in areas where the present-day water depth ranges from 500 to 1,000 meters. There were a multitude of canyons cut into lithified carbonate, cliffs ranging from 750 to 1,000 meters high with plunge pools at the base. Now, a plunge pool is what happens when a waterfall comes over a cliff and slams down into the rock at the bottom. That's a subaerial feature.
In the Columbia basalt.
Yeah. So they found subaerial plunge pools, evidence of waterfalls, and subaerial oil seeps sandwiched between oceanic sediments. These seeps lack common features of marine oil seeps, showing little biodegradation and no preserved marine microfossils, whereas almost all oil seeps that are formed in deep water have microfossils preserved in them.
Let me read a paragraph from that Rosenfeld thing, because this is another one that I put a great big marker next to. That this is Rosenfeld, the geologist, not Clarey the nincompoop, that's writing. It says, a eureka moment came with the realization that Cuba, at the leading edge of the northward migrating Caribbean plate, had docked against the Florida-Bahamas continental block of North America during late Pliocene to early Eocene time, possibly blocking the 200-kilometer wide strait that connects the GOM to the World Ocean. Imbricated thrust faults in the suture zone between Cuba and the Florida-Bahamas block indicated that welding of Cuba to North America was tectonically intense. Allochthonous Yucatan-derived rocks are welded to Western Cuba, indicating that these two terrains were also in close contact. Now, that had to have been under Clarey's eyeballs, because this was his only source that he cited.
Yeah.
He had to have known about it.
So when he mentions when Clarey claims they don't have any evidence of subaerial evaporation and erosion, we do, and he ignored all of it. I would say this might be a weird statement, but I would say evidence of a waterfall and of sinkholes probably means something was exposed to the air. As shocking as that might be.
Yeah, it's like I see a lot of Niagara Falls going on under the ocean.
Yeah.
I mean, this just happens all the time.
But as for the thing, why don't we have salt? And he said, and Clarey claims there is no salt at the level of the Whopper Sands. Well, one of Rosenfeld's more technical papers on this, which is related to this issue, explicitly states that where salt would be expected to be deposited has not been drilled yet. We don't know what's under there. So how can Clarey claim we know there's no salt when it hasn't been drilled?
Yeah, this is really recent work that's been done.
But furthermore, the same paper goes on to say that evaporation-induced drawdown, quote unquote, would not necessarily have deposited evaporites because it depends on the total water column removed from the Gulf of Mexico, which was many thousands of meters deep. Essentially, if evaporation takes place and you have a massive drawdown, but there's still enough water to prevent the salt concentration from reaching saturation limit and the rest precipitating out, you're not going to have an evaporite form. So not only is Clarey wrong in saying that they know there's no salt because it hasn't even been looked for yet, but the one of the same guy's paper says even if we don't find salt, it's not a requirement.
Yeah. He's just got the whole thing wrong. And the other thing that intrigued me, and this shows the worldview difference between the creationist that's trying to ramrod this thing into the flood, whereas the real scientists connect dots, is the fact that this is occurring during the PETM, the Paleo-Eocene Thermal Maximum. That the argument is that maybe this was having something to do with why the temperatures were so high during this period. There was all sorts of interlocking geochemical and ocean current systems.
It was
and all
really
this stuff.
Cool.
And so they're connecting dots. Oh, another thing that came up, I didn't put a link up to it, but it was one of those things I go, wow, I'm going to have to revise that. And we'll allude to it in the new book because the one standout that no one had been able to find any indication that there was an impact during one of the mass extinctions was the Permian. Until now, there is some evidence that's just accumulated that there is a mega crater in Antarctica, way bigger than Chicxulub, that dates.
Boy.
And it's covered under ice. That's why they were having so much trouble finding these damn things. There was a brand new paper on this kind of, the Wilkes Shield impact crater that dates to the right time. Plus, so now you've got this double whammy, this thing that you have eruptions in the Siberian traps and an impact event, and you have the Deccan traps in the Cretaceous event plus an impact event. It's just where the critters during those periods are going, oh no, not this. I had a vacation planned.
Cretaceous dinosaurs when the Chicxulub is coming towards Earth and Deccan traps are going up. Ah, shit, not again.
But the economy, RJ, the economy.
I have one more thing to add about Clarey's article.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Clarey complains that groundwater would have had to lower as well, and I don't really know what his argument is there. He just seems to be stating something, and it's like, okay, well, if the evidence indicates that happened, then it happened. Incredulity, I guess. But then he goes on to say, he leaves a quote from Rosenfeld, asking basically, how could the sea level in the Gulf of Mexico have suddenly fallen and then just as suddenly risen in order to create the Wilcox Sand Deposit, which is the Whopper Sands, that's its actual name, and basically refill the Gulf of Mexico extremely quickly.
I have an idea.
What is it?
2 words. Continental drift.
In a sense, yes. So what happened was the very same source that he gives goes on to explain that they found in the western Straits of Florida an 800-meter deep, partially filled paleo canyon, which cuts into Cretaceous carbonates. They note that this canyon could not have been carved by a gentle current like the Gulf Stream, and so there's really only one answer to this. Something happened to cause the Straits of Florida to experience a giant outburst from the Atlantic Ocean to suddenly refill the Gulf of Mexico. And they explicitly describe it as a pretty cataclysmic event. It was not a good time for anything living in that area.
It would be like the Gibraltar Falls opening up. You get this thing. And of course, shock, it's a tectonically active area.
Yeah.
So
Boy, I mean, what could have given the force that could do these sorts of things other than the volcanic things and the plate movements that we know are happening there?
Yeah, so when Clarey leaves a quote from this guy's source saying, well, this is strange. How could it refill just as quickly as it evaporated? And then the source provides the answer saying, we found the key evidence that the Atlantic came rushing in here.
And Clarey doesn't mention it. That's
not at all.
Because that's the thing where he's clearly suppressing information. Now, this is if this were the first time that Clarey had ever done that, we would go, but no, this is a pattern of behavior. You're going to enjoy reading through all of the examples of Clarey's fun and games that we've been documenting.
And then he'd say, bad dog, Clarey. Bad dog.
Yeah, this was bad.
Yeah. No,
Like,
he's Clarey is the other one, the other drum that he keeps on banging, and he does it almost every month in Acts and Facts, is this cockamamie chart that Chadwick and others came up with for the sea levels going back to the Cretaceous and earlier. And they just, that's the one based on the mega sequences, where they arbitrarily decide that evidence for erosion of the mega sequences and the volume of the mega sequences can be used as a proxy for sea level. So they just dispense with all the actual sea level data, and they come up with their own little wiggly curve. And even it has giant holes in it where you're wondering, so the bottom of this is the start of the flood and the end of it is the end of the flood? What are these sea level fluctuations that we're seeing according to your own cockamamie chart? They never explain any of that.
I think I have the answer though, RJ, because I just found an interesting paper today. Believe it or not, courtesy of Mr. Bob Enyart, who was getting very pissy with John Baumgartner. Turns out Baumgartner has proposed, in order to explain the force needed to move all the vast swaths of sediment in the middle of the flood, that a moon-sized planet swung past the Earth about 6 times during Noah's flood.
Can we call it Nibiru?
I'm not joking. Nibiru. He literally believes that another extraterrestrial object just whoosh, and the tidal forces moved everything. I can get
would this be ad hoc number 85 or number 86?
I would thought we were up into the 90s by now.
RJ, Colton, Jackson, I've got it. He must have consulted the most excellent Dr. Claudia Albas on this.
I have a problem with that statement though.
Just one?
Well, yeah, because first of all, does this person know anything about what is known as the Roche limit?
It hasn't bothered most of them so far. Although, frankly, Humphreys has way less excuse to be ignorant of that kind of a stuff than, say, Kent Hovind is with his big ice snowball.
I mean, seriously, if you're going to claim that a huge moon-sized object swung past Earth close enough to cause some major issues with the flood, then you have to factor in the fact that if anything actually got that close, it would start breaking apart. Do you know what happens when a moon-sized object starts breaking apart under tidal forces?
But remember, the creator of the universe created all the rules and can suspend them absolutely arbitrarily whenever it's convenient, so that we don't have to account for that.
Oh, and he says nothing about it in his scriptures, by the way.
Well, now, if you get out the special lenses and twist them just right.
That's like, that reminds me of the people who say the demons rode dinosaurs in their battles with the angels. That reminds me of that.
Although I still do like the idea of Saint George and Saint Michael throwing lightning bolts at Satan during the battle, and that's what caused the craters of the moon. That was Henry Morris's model back in the 1970s.
Nice.
Yeah,
but what about
it would be in 3D? I tell you, if we can just get what's his name that makes all those schlocky science fiction movies and that, or Roland Emmerich.
We should get Michael Bay.
Michael Bay, yes, and have a new thing there. We could get what's his name from that just signed to play the Tiger King guy. He could play the lead in.
You're talking about Nick Cage.
Nick Cage,
Oh,
yeah,
Nick
Nick Cage
Cage.
has got to be in all
Hey,
the
I
movies.
I have the paper here. I'll get you. I'll send you the file later. But
Yeah.
it's called "Explaining the Continental Fossil-Bearing Sediment Recorded in Terms of the Genesis Flood: Insights from Numerical Modeling of Erosion, Sediment Transport, and Deposition Processing at the Summit Global Scale." Blah 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 blah. But here's what he says: as an initial working hypothesis, horizontal accelerations required to achieve water velocities of 100 to 250 meters per second arise from a sequence of large tides produced by repeated near approaches of a moon-sized body with the Earth.
It conveniently
And-
disappears. Oh, Lisa asked, was
Well,
the inland sea in the Americas incorporated
Based
into
on
the
this result, it is proposed that 6 nearby encounters with a moon-sized body temporarily caused the Earth, or temporarily captured by the Earth, so somehow it later accelerated and got slungshot out, can plausibly account for the 6 mega sequences. And we captured a moon to create Clarey's mega sequences.
temporarily, and then it conveniently went away.
Yeah,
Alicia
and we
was
can't
asking
track it
about
anywhere.
the inland sea, the Niobrara Seaway in the Americas. Was that incorporated into the Mississippi? If my remembrance is that the Mississippi is kind of a late drainage system. I think there were some papers I may have even have linked to a couple episodes back about the formation of the drainage systems that was occurring as the sea gradually filled in. So the Mississippi is a relatively recent particular version of that eventually drained down into that. The time sequence for the Niobrara Seaway was it was starting already to fill in and dry and alter even in the Jurassic period, and I think the northern end of it blocked off by the Cretaceous and then gradually filled in. So that one is maybe Colton has heard more about that than I do, about the drainage systems that were coming off of a lot of the mountains. The Rocky Mountains were just rising during that period, and you had a different thing because some of the earlier mountains would have been somewhat bigger. Was going on. So
I've got
it's
several
a whole
problems
different drainage
regarding
system.
that whole flood thing, that the near Earth object issue. So first, let me just turn off the sound in my where's my audio? There it is.
Yes, that's a
Music
good
volume,
idea.
fuck you. Now we're talking a moon-sized planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. They
Can you
said it. They
specify
say
how
it.
big of a moon-sized planet.
They specify pretty vaguely, just saying that it needed to be about a fourth the size of the moon or greater.
And of course, it wouldn't have any gravitational interactions with the moon, would it?
No.
Maybe
course not, RJ.
that might be why they think it got shot off. Maybe it got slingshot, but I don't know if
It takes two to tango. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, there we go. There. Oh boy. Well,
not to say that it might not have been equally as likely for it to be broke.
BJ suggests Earth must have an on-off switch for capturing moons. See, that would account for it.
Yeah, you know, I don't remember any of this from the Bible. Maybe if you hold the black light over it, maybe you'll find something.
Yeah, that was the thing. There was a switch with a do not flip.
Speculative scenario.
Yeah, there was actually a switch next to their furnace aboard Noah's Ark with a switch in Hebrew that said "Do not flip," and somebody came in, flipped it. Suddenly, a moon is popping in. Then
do you mind if I share my screen? Because I got a perfect simulation. I have Universe Sandbox open right now.
Oh, I think we'll have to pass on that one. On we don't want to do any screen sharing on there. We'll just skip on that. Don't let us not
or Baumgartner.
I'll have to say not nice words because that'll jack up all of the pictures on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Let us not tempt the gods of Zoom on this.
You can show us actually after the show.
And Mr. Parker said, "Do we send moons to Saturn or something?" Oh, they might as well.
Maybe it was Europa.
Them.
Wait, dude, the ice moons that are around them, you think they form normally? No, those were blasted off the Earth.
Yeah.
They did the whole thing, and then they got slungshot by our moon out to the other
they
gas giants.
Off the moon.
That is part of Kent Hovind's theory. That's exactly what he argues.
Wait, this is the lunar bukkake.
Oh my god.
Our moon.
I don't think it's been amended to the point of saying Europa just popped off of Earth, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. And this may give you some realization as to why such views are not regarded with great enthusiasm by the regular scientific community.
Yeah.
You see, this is why this is in essence why they just kind of frown and say moving on whenever they hear
let me
about
interject
creationism.
on a moving on here. Let me thank all my patrons since we're slightly past the half hour on there. I again thank you all, because given how financially stressed and worrisome everything is, the fact that we have not had any jumble on patrons going bye-bye RJ has been really important, and I am grateful. So let me thank my colleagues level at Hendril and Eric Rowley and Benjamin Simpson and Speed of Sound and Surus and Zeshi, and our researcher level Travis Adams and Ian Chen and Convert Me and Eat Meal and James Fitzwater and History Minor and Ralph McFadden and Paulogia, and assistant researchers Mike Apple and Doranku and Todas Real, and our friends Daniel and Steve Bauman and Marigale Beddoes and Insects Are Cool and Devin Reeves and Morton Nielsen and Paul the Skeptic and Puffalophagus and Bo Rasmussen and Alex Stone and Paul Williams. And I will continue to thank the legacy patrons who were able to help at one point or another, Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Yana and Stagos and Sunsky Stone and Ugly Drum and Truls and Everett and Soar. Ta-da! It makes a difference. We're still awaiting the nebulous government check that some people have received and that I may or may not get at some stage. Hasn't shown up yet, either in the bank account or in a physical check. That will make a difference if so. And then also book royalties, which cascade over the month. And so hopefully by the end of May, there will be an improved situation on there. But anyway, thanks everybody on that. So let's get back to some high level stupid on there. You know, the thing.
Beej and Lisa actually have something,
Oh.
which is, where did all the poop go from Noah's Ark? It formed the moon.
Hey,
Obviously.
TD Lane.
Yes,
can you
indeed.
send this to
You know,
RJ
that would
for him
cause
to
there.
share?
They haven't thought about that. Instead of just the fountains of the deep,
Okay.
there's the big squirt up of poop and fish urine and stuff that would be swooshing up there. You know, that I don't think there's a whole new area for Snelling and that to consider. In, you know, like what is the erosion faculties for urine? Urea, what for the rocks? We have to think about maybe the poop was acting as a cement that was causing lithification faster. You can see, Colton, there's a whole new branch of creationist pseudogeology here.
Oh man, why am I following Lyell when I could follow this?
Guys,
you just gotta think biblically.
The whirlpools.
Oh,
think about the whirlpools.
That form the chalk deposits?
Yes.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah. Kent Hovind tour guide told me that one.
Kent Hovind tour guide.
Yeah,
I'm actually running the simulation in Universe Sandbox, and it is not good. There are pieces of moon stuff slamming into the Earth, and so far they've raised the temperature on the planet by about 150 degrees Celsius.
No, it'll be fine.
Where do you get Universe? Where do you get that program, Tornado?
Steam.
Oh,
yeah, I'm wondering that. Dapper Dino asks, "How does a whirlpool create a chalk deposit?" We're wondering that too, dude.
Yeah. You know what? Ask him that, and I read the technical paper describing that deposit, and I literally just read the intro, and he said, "I don't hear anything about a whirlpool," and I said, "No kidding."
Lisa, for Truth, asked, she heard about a crazy hypothesis in the 1800s that Earth had rings and the flood was due to one collapsing. That probably fits in. There's a long tradition of wackaloon creationism and catastrophism that imagines stuff like that. And so the ice canopy model that was developed in the 1960s briefly and generally abandoned by creationists on the minor problem that it's physically impossible and will never work.
But if they're going to use miracles for plate tectonics and accelerated decay, why not just use it here?
Yeah, exactly. And that's,
none of these miracles are mentioned in the Bible, so why do you care?
It's because they want to be science-y. That there's a tradition in there that's really been since the 18th and 19th century that has the patina of scientific discovery to it. So if you can find a way to have a natural event that will fit into the narrative, they really are attracted to it like bears to honey. that it's something that they really want to have. You find exactly the same phenomenon with the Exodus groupies that are trying to figure out how, okay, there's a volcanic eruption and then there's a tidal surge and there's all these things that we can work out.
$30.
Hmm?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot my mic was still on.
Oh, $30 is cheap, Jackson, for video games nowadays.
Screw you guys. I'm going home.
$60 is the standard.
But you didn't just spend $70 on 6 different games and DLCs?
What the frick is wrong with you? Oh my god.
You
I'm a
can get
trust fund
Terraria
baby.
for $10.
What do you expect
That's
from me?
cheap.
Vesta Freya asked, is that whirlpool or whirlpoo?
Yes.
Yeah, as I said, this is a whole
Yeah, the
new,
answer is yes.
it's gonna, we never thought that coprolites could be an experimental science.
Oh my god, why is everything?
How dare you bring up historical science?
Yes. Well, there we go. Historical science, another area. We'll give you a little bit of a presage of what's going to be in volume 2, because we haven't left the flood away, and we also have to deal with the fact that by a weird coincidence, radiocarbon dating actually is magnificently useful for working out relatively recent history, because we actually have like pots and it's archaeological strata and things that you can physically cross-reference so that you can build up stuff. And I know this is going to be a really big surprise, spoiler alert, that the radiocarbon dating works really good at that, which means it's really accurate. And so if it works for like 2,000 years ago and 3,500 years ago and 4,800 years ago and 9,600 years ago, we just slipped past the age of the universe. According
RJ, AIG told me carbon dating doesn't work. And even if it does, it's not reliable.
Well, the funny thing is they will use it to date biblical fragments, and also archaeological data. Which actually, I saw a whole movie about how they use it to date biblical fragments, and they're like, "Oh, this proves the reliability and all that." So it's like it's only good when it's not against us, but as soon as it is against us, we can chuck it.
So that's another area where my historian's eye comes into play, because you have a huge, if just as Colton is aware of the gigantic geological literature out there, it's just as detailed for the historical archaeological field of all of the digs that are done in Mesoamerica and in Polynesia and in China and everywhere. Plus, we've got the DNA to look at. We can dig up an old body and do the DNA analysis and work out the haplotypes and work out the migration patterns that peoples have over time and correlate that with all of their pottery and all of the other stuff. Guess how much of that information gets discussed by the creationists?
But RJ, you're missing the point. If you use an unrooted phylogenetic tree, there are 3 clusters in mitochondrial DNA, which means there was 3 women off the ark.
Yeah.
But ignore the fact that as soon as you root that, it turns out that they're all descended from 1. And that there's actually 4 that's a subset of 2.
Yeah, and the fact that it just he completely messes with like the size of the chart and everything. Yeah, no, it's ridiculous.
The whole thing was a mess.
Oh, here's the fun thing, though.
It's like, what?
Here's the fun thing about carbon dating. All they need to do to make carbon dating not a problem anymore is just move the age of the universe back to 60,000 years. Because at that point, carbon dating's rather unreliable.
Well, that would be
easy. The
funny thing is
Ellen White.
For as much as these creationists like to talk about the radiocarbon stuff, anytime they date a dinosaur bone with radiocarbon, they're always doing the bone mineral, despite the fact that archaeologists are like, no, don't use that. Try to use collagen, and they never do. And I found a report not too long ago, I believe I shared it in our group chat, where they dated the collagen of several different bones, and they all came back with a greater than the detection limit of this procedure date, meaning the collagen was radiocarbon dead. You can't have any samples radiocarbon dead in a young Earth scenario.
Yeah.
It is not allowed to occur. You cannot
everything should be radiocarbon datable.
Yes.
Easy peasy, and it would be really recent. This would be exactly the sort of evidence that would be gobsmackingly impressive if young Earth creationism were true. But the fact that it's never true works against the argument being likely.
Yes.
Yeah,
The fact that they're wrong means that they're wrong. Thank you.
No. It's a conspiracy. And do you really think a conspiracy would leave evidence of itself behind? No. A lack of evidence that I'm being shut down is proof that I'm being shut down. Checkmate.
Yeah. Oh, another bit about why the
I
Exodus
concede.
example and where the chronology comes in. You have to remember that along with that Bishop Usher era, and he wasn't the only one to do this stuff, where they were working out. Everybody focuses on the 4000 date for the creation of the world, but there was more to it than that. By that dating the patriarchs crap, you can arrive at a conclusion that the Exodus should have occurred around 1500 BC. The flood would be occurring around 2350 BC. That's where the chronology comes from. And if you look when they try to mention dates much at all, that young earth creationism pretty much sticks to that scenario. So they want the Exodus to be 1500 BC, not 1200 BC during the Ramessid times, which all the evidence, if there was an Exodus at all, drags it down because they mention Pi-Ramesses and all of that stuff that doesn't fit a 1500 BC date in for Egyptian chronology. So that's why that there's just as much of a stratigraphy problem in the layers of the history events for the Egyptians and everything connected to them, because of the Elamarna archives that linked up Akhenaten with all of the cultures around him. You've got this vast interlocking network. They've got letters from Hittites that are talking about stuff. It's just too much. So you can imagine the panic that will occur when the young earth creationists realize that they've got to deal with moving all of that down to the flood, post-flood too, because none of that stuff is going to interact.
RJ, don't they say the ancient Egyptian kingdoms were simultaneous?
Yes.
Well, they play around with a lot. The up until recently, most of the creationists didn't even think about it. Probably because none of them are Egyptologists. They're not historians. So they literally paid no attention to it. And in fact, still there aren't any creationist Egyptologists. But a bunch of the little dilettantes in the young earth creationist movement can add, and they can realize that huge history of Egypt, which keeps getting more and more and more detailed as they get more and more pre-dynastic material and archaeology done, that's pushing back thousands of years before the pyramids. And that's too big of a continuity to let stand. So there is a small bunch of creationists that have bit the bullet and are trying to pull all of Egypt down past the flood. They can't let one little damned Egyptian with one little hieroglyph predate the flood, because otherwise you have the problem of where exactly did a people exist with traditions and gods and all of that, and then they're obliterated in the flood, and Noah's kids, breeding like rabbits, repopulate Egypt lickety split, and then pick up with the same styles of clothing, the same gods, all the same funerary traditions. Wow, isn't it amazing? What did they get, the little guide to living like an Egyptian book when they settled there?
It's pretty amazing.
It was actually a brochure.
It's pretty amazing how those ancient Egyptians before the Noids were building of the sandstone that hadn't been laid down yet.
Yeah, well,
that was another thing.
Colton. What do you say?
You're thinking of it too. You're thinking of it too hard, though. See, that's completely acceptable, because remember, this was a group of people who literally had gods save them from Egypt. They watched miracles in front of their eyes, and within a few days, they immediately started worshiping a golden calf.
Yeah, these are real backsliders.
So you cannot tell me these were exactly the smartest people ever, which I wonder.
Well, you have to remember that Aaron was the Sean Hannity of the Bronze Age.
I think it's kind of funny because I remember Matt Dillahunty did a whole talk about that. It's like, if I were in jail and a blue orb opened the door and led me safely out to like a running car and I could get away, I'd be pretty thankful for that, for the blue orb. I wouldn't just turn around and be like, oh, forget that thing.
That was even to show you how difficult it is dramatically. Everybody catch every Easter, because it's a spectacular piece of VistaVision schlock, the Ten Commandments. It's a spectacular movie. It's gorgeous to watch. It is almost everybody and his brother was in it. A big score in stereo. It's really fun. But even as a kid, when I watched that in the clunky little TV versions that were shown on TV, it bothered me. they're backsliding and making the golden calf. Did your memory lapse as to what we just experienced the last hour?
That was
literally
always
saw
my
the
thought.
sea open up and we walked through it.
Yeah, and then I was in Sunday school and I had my little Bible reading all of that about that, and I noticed, wait a minute, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Whoa, you mean Pharaoh has said the people can go? Okay, you can go, you have my permission, and God changes his mind. The only thing I could offer as an explanation for that was that God had picked up the 10 miracle kit, Jiffy kit at Radio Shack. And you can't go yet. I haven't gotten to the plague 6, 7, 8, and 9 yet. You can't pull that shtick off. I spent good money for this damn thing.
It really does feel like it's not that easy. You're gonna learn.
So when the movie was made, it's revealing that they cut all of that out. There is no reference to God's hardening the Pharaoh's heart, because you can't. It won't work dramatically. It's going to be weird if you try to do that. And so it's funky to see how the filmmakers have to kind of tidy it up to make a dramatic narrative that sounds pretty much okay. They got to leave the stuff on the cutting room floor, but the theologians can't do that. And so there's some problems with that.
Oh, Dapper Dino just added, to be fair, the idea behind the golden calf was that it was a statue of the god who led the Israelites out of Egypt. I didn't know that.
Oh, there's a lot of funky material that goes on in trying to figure out what the hell actually went on with the Exodus story. That there's so little documentation for it. There's so little support for Israelites being enslaved in Egypt. It's not implausible, but the thing is that there's lacking so many layers of things that people start pondering how much of it was their story and how much of it was stuff they borrowed from people they bumped into. And that the whole bit that's another big mystery is the movement into Canaan. That everything about the archaeology suggests there was no abrupt coming in of the Israelites swooping in and having big battles and things that were going on. It looks like it was very gradual, that there was probably a lot of intermarriage going on, that there was nothing really big fussy about it, that eventually things start looking a little more traditionally Israelis because they build certain kind of houses and the other Canaanite tribes.
RJ, I read an article years ago that discussed how how certain sites like Jericho might have actually been abandoned by the time that the Israelites were supposed to be coming into Canaan. Does that ring any bells or no?
Oh, I literally didn't hear you because I was looking at Dapper Dino's thing. What would you say again about? I'm sorry. Sorry.
I said I read an article a long time ago that said some of the cities like Jericho were actually allegedly abandoned around the time that the influx of Israelites, according to the Bible, were supposed to have been.
That could very well be true. That
I don't know if that's accurate. That's just what I read.
It wouldn't surprise me. The thing is that all of that archaeology of the area, the same problem occurred when they excavated Troy, and Schliemann, who was obsessed with the Homeric epics, ramrodded the story into that. And it turns out so much of the story isn't fitting what his narrative was. But on Dapper Dino's point, this is why I plead guilty for having paid no attention to what you were saying, is that Dapper was asking, how would you show God hardening a heart on screen? That's actually an interesting dramatic point.
The Pharaoh eats a Big Mac.
It would be done musically. If you want to think, it's the same thing as when you're trying to figure out what's going on inside of Yoda's brain when he's lifting a ship up with the Force. You're using it with music, you're using it with editing and all of that stuff. I'm just thinking of it as a dramatist, as how you'd go about doing that. But good question, Dapper. And you made me make Jackson annoyed because I wasn't listening to him.
I'm not annoyed.
I would think of would be like, play some like voice in the back of his head saying, "What are you doing? You can't let them leave," or something.
Oh yeah,
like
there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I'll tell you. Here's a totally irrelevant digression, but I'll bring it up anyway because I like it. If you've ever seen the movie The Bad Seed, and it was recently, I think, remade, but the classic one that was done back in the 1950s, and I think Alex North wrote the music for it. Same guy that did Spartacus and Cleopatra and Dragon Slayer and Star Trek 4, the one with the whales. Anyway, No, that was Rosenfeld. Alex North. Anyway, there's this homicidal kid, this nut kid who's just going around and she's murdering people. She's really not nice.
Nice.
And there is a scene of her walking down a street and she's smiling. Nothing in the visuals is going to tell you anything at all about that. It's going to look as innocent as the driven snow until you put his music in. And then you're going, yeek, what is going on in her head? Where is she going to? You know, it's just tense as all get out because of the background scoring. So that role of music in that is a way that you convey, or for that matter, if you've ever seen Patton, there's a scene where the Japanese have signed a non-aggression pact with the Germans, an alliance. And it's just a bunch of people sitting at a table, a couple Germans and a couple Japanese, and they're signing papers. Isn't that dramatic? Jerry Goldsmith's music has this like yipes quality about it. You're going, no, doom. That's just
not that paper.
Yeah, and so that's the power of music to convey that. So that, Dapper, would be how you would convey the God hardening Pharaoh's heart bit. You'd have a leitmotif theme about
All
God, the God theme. And then suddenly he gets this look in his eye and you're hearing the God theme, and suddenly he says something different. And you realize, uh-oh, there's that little scamp God again doing his little thing.
Little scamp.
Old Testament God was a dick.
Yeah, and
that
so the Exodus is a fascinating little area. That we mentioned it very briefly in a little section of the rocks were there, because there's, I think, one of the info boxes, the fact that there's this cottage industry to figure out what the hell was going on with the Santorini eruption, because the Exodus people want to connect that up with that, and there's a whole bunch
Atlantis.
And Atlantis. Well, I personally favor the idea that to the extent that Plato's Atlantis has any reality at all, it's a very muddled account of the Santorini eruption and the Minoans.
But RJ, did Plato invent Socrates?
That I doubt. But anyway, at the very least, he used him as a sock puppet.
We only have records. I think we only have like documents of Socrates from like Plato and one other guy.
No, and that's true of all of the same reason that there's a debate over whether Homer existed. And there's various historians, and I'm of that group that would contend, for me, it would be more surprising that there was no Homer at all than that it was.
I don't know. I don't take a position on it. I just think it's intriguing.
Yeah. And so this is, in fact, exactly the same thing, Colton, that we're getting into when we're looking at that philosophical presupposition crap that the creationists like to play with. That instead of dealing with rocks, which are just a rock, it has forensic data. The historian is way worse, because human beings can bullshit. They can lie. They can forge stuff. I have my famous sculpture that I bought years ago of Nefertiti that is apparently, odds are it was a fake. That the most famous sculpture of Nefertiti's bust was only found by a guy who was known for putting up, yes, not the bust part, but the yeah.
Yeah, that's why I like what I do, because nature, if I'm solving nature's crime scene of who killed the dinosaurs, she doesn't lie. Yeah. She doesn't cover her tracks, and even when something else comes along and might erase a key trace or something, it will leave evidence behind too. Whereas if I'm solving an actual murder scene, somebody can pick up his bullet casing, wipe the powder off around the gunshot wound, and be done with it.
And you know,
there's nothing I can do about it.
I'm just, you may be aware of or any counterexamples. I'm not really offhand. We have the examples of Piltdown, which was a deliberate fraud. And you have examples of a guy who was kind of carving crap. And of course, the Ica stones pop up. But the thing about geological literature, you can find people that are playing a little fast and loose with their data field, and those are more likely to be creationists doing that than non-creationists. But I can't think offhand of somebody trying to forge a rock deposit or something like that.
Isn't it kind of interesting that the creationists are always harping about how like we can't trust paleontologists because of Piltdown Man, when like all the Ica stones were forgeries, and yet we're like, hello, excuse me.
And that's why I can be a smug bastard here, because I'm coming from the historian's direction. This is my gig. and so I know exactly how the historical mind works and how different axes to grind in historical work goes, and how people have their agendas that they're putting. You find ones that are like Marxist historians, and then you add someone like a Gibbon, famous person who was a pivotal for years. He just didn't like Christianity. So he decided that Christianity is the reason why the Roman Empire fell. They got to be Christian, and that was just down the toilet. I think most historians today would argue, oh, that's way too simplistic.
Yeah, they were on the downslide for a long time by that point.
Yeah. I'm one that believes that the doom of Rome began way before Caesar was born. That the seeds of Rome's collapse were already in play by the time Caesar comes along as a big egotist. And then the evil genius of the grand narrative is Augustus, who manages to do everything that Caesar ever wanted to do and not end up a pincushion. And he's the one that reigns for longer than almost any of the emperors. And he picks the things up and laminates this pseudo republic that's now an absolute autocracy, and dooms it to slowly deteriorate for the next 400 or 500 years, and then petrify in the Byzantine side in Constantinople, where it turns into this it's so far removed from Cato and all that bunch in the early Roman Republic. It was a slow, pathetic decline.
The only to answer your question, the only forger that I'm aware of in geology, and we actually went over him in my archaeology class, and this isn't really even a geology thing because the dude was a geologist, but it was more of an archaeological forgery than anything. His name was Edward Simpson, and he forged a lot of things like arrowheads and spearheads out of flint and shirt and tried to pass them off as being real. But in terms of people like forging the data out of a rock deposit, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah,
I'm sure there are cases of people selectively using their data and then being called out for it, but that's not really the same thing that like faking.
Where forgeries are selected for in the society are two main areas. One is just the fame bit. Oh, look at what I discovered. I've overturned. That was probably Dawson's motivation for Piltdown. Suddenly, he was just a little schlump who's now hobnobbing with the actual scientists with his little thing. And of course, he dropped dead, I think 1914 or so. And so he wasn't even around to worry about it afterward. The other is money. And so most of the fraudulent cases we see today have to do with like medicines and things where you have like billions of dollars to be made if this thing works. That woman that created that fraudulent testing capacity there for some DNA testing thing, there's tons. When there's that much money to be made and your insurance company will pay for it, holy moly, there is an incentive for the fraudulent if you don't watch out. And other than that,
you want to know a real fraud in medicine? The Brzezinski Clinic. Those cancer treatment guys who think that because they find some cancer patients missing like a certain element in their urine, that if you inject that element back into them, it'll cure all sorts of cancers. They were what killed one of my best friends because her parents took her there thinking that it would cure her brain tumor, and she didn't get any real treatment.
Yeah, and that moves over from just mere fraud to scuzz bucketry.
Yeah, that guy, the guy who owns that clinic, has been sued by the government several times, and he somehow keeps weaseling his way out of it.
And
Andrew Wakefield in his material on the vaccine maneuver there. Dapper Dino brings up also there's a record of Heckel being tried for fraud by his university, but not of him being convicted. Yeah, that's one of those little not quite.
There actually, I think that there was one of those that was made up. Interestingly enough, because he was in a lawsuit for libel with this other guy. And one of the claims the other guy made was that Heckel had been tried by the university for, I believe it was for the embryos, but that actually never happened. There's no record that he was ever actually
There's an awful lot. You always, one thing you have to deal with in any of these areas is to be very, very careful about the historical scholarship. And there was a little cautionary tale where I brought up Tolman, and who is a microbiologist creationist that popped up because he was the co-author of some material relating to the imipenum medicine, and that was brought up by Michael Behe at Dover. So that's why I introduced it. It's all in tip 1.7. Anyway, the thing that the one creationist piece that Tolman ever wrote was on the biogenesis thing, and Louis Pasteur and others. And there was a whole network of, it's not quite what you think it is. And he was relying in many respects on an old 1920s book that was quite a classic on the microbe hunters. But he was not drawing on the kind of material that we have available in the 21st century. And so you got to be very, very careful about that. Sometimes some of the things future scholarship can muddle along in the same way that bring it back to the beginning of the show, the stuff that Moore and others did on the complexity of did Sutton actually come up with Sutton's model or not, and how much did people impede the development because they were stuck on a particular model and they couldn't quite get past that. You think about the discovery of DNA and how you had that hissy fit ego fight between Linus Pauling and the bunch at Crick and Watson and Franklin going on, the race to figure out what the structure of DNA was. And so there's a lot of these squabbles are ones that come about because of personality squiggles. You've got the same thing going between the Stephen Jay Gould and the Dawkins camp and John Maynard Smith, and that you had the British evolutionists and then the American paleontologists, punctuated equilibrium types. And oh boy, they were hot at it in the 1970s, lobbing criticisms back and forth between the others on it. And then you have to kind of settle back and go, oh, let's kind of cool down.
You're both right, and you're both wrong. Go home.
RJ, slightly changing the topic, but
go ahead.
Robert Byers, remember how I keep showing
all
his
he's the bad penny.
I just got a response from him on something, and he is now actively denying that stars and the sun create light, and that fires and light bulbs create light. He thinks
he might as well.
He thinks that
they are goes along.
He might as well just say the Earth's pizza shaped.
He thinks that when I turn a light on, or I light a fire, or I light a match, that it goes through some fifth dimensional veil where the light from day one of creation is, and that's what allows the light through.
Oh,
that's idiotic.
Lisa, you were wondering where all the poo went? It's in Robert Byers' brain. Everybody in the anti-evolution area or anti-creationism criticism area has bumped into Robert Byers. He's
everywhere.
He haunts everybody's website. He's gone on to my website. He does stuff over Jerry Coyne. He goes at Matt Herron.
Hey Colton, where can I find this? I want to have words with this.
Janice has a field day.
I'm gonna drop the relevant thread in the comments here for anyone to see.
Yeah, almost everybody. In fact, you could actually measure it that if somebody has never heard of Robert Byers, they have never bumped into much creationism because you can't avoid him.
I'll have you know, Mel, it's just been a long day.
It's in the live chat now, the relevant Reddit link.
I'm always yawning.
We're slightly past the hour. I think we've beaten a bunch of dead horses on that one. I definitely want to thank
let me do that.
for alerting us to that new Clarey piece, because we don't want to let that thing pass for volume 2.
Bring it up. Tear it open, because God, that was awful. Oh, they only use the canyons. No, there's a lot more. Oh, there should be.
We're going to have an introductory chapter. That it'll be still 7 chapters for the whole book. There will be a chapter 1 will be a recap of what we did in volume 1, and we'll be able to put in any of the this is what's happened since on these matters, and then we'll be having a detailed analysis of the biblical flood and how it came from Sumerian legends and the Black Sea flooding issue.
I actually wrote that. I wrote about the Black Sea thing for my my term paper in archaeology.
Yeah,
and there's been a lot of evidence against it that's been popping up.
Well, there's one blob. This is one of those where you suspect hissy fits, where you got camps. because you have one blob of geologists that cannot stand the idea that there was a Black Sea flooding, and they are the main ones that just write the same groups over and over again. And then you got the one that what's his name that did the Titanic?
Excuse me,
Robert Ballard,
and his grouping that operates in different contexts. So we've got all the references and stuff available. We'll kind of go into that and look into where the forensics are.
I broke somebody. I think.
You broke the
yeah, poor little guy. And then we'll have a chapter.
No, RJ, go look at that, please. It's
What?
It really is that bad.
It's in the group chat.
God!
It's a post by Byers, asking why Bible deniers don't start questioning the verse about God saying that light doesn't come from the sun. And quote unquote, he says, "Light no more comes from the sun than from a fire in a cave." That is an actual quote from Byers.
Oh,
okay, it's in a live chat now.
I think even what's his name?
Did everyone mute up for a second?
Maxwell. I think Maxwell would whoop him upside the
Mute
head.
your thing and scream because it's awful.
Could everyone mute for a second? Because I'm going to play my reaction to that thing via this. That is
Byers is one of those litmus test people that you will encounter. They've never written anything in detail. They haven't done he may have a book somewhere, I don't know, but he's just.
I hope he does.
He's in that field of crankdom. You've got the ones like Mr. Intelligent Design, who is an amiable nincompoop, but he's very, very pleasant. Byers is a truculent, snotty, Trumpian character who just really thinks he knows subject matter way more than he actually even has any illusions to.
To date, here are the things that he says. Dinosaurs aren't real. All theropods are just some weird bird. Mammals aren't real. Reptiles aren't real. Gravity doesn't exist. Light does not come from any light source in the universe. That you can compare the formation of caves and salt layers and caves and limestone, even though it's completely different chemistry, because similar body plans.
Of caves?
Yes.
I gotta tell you that is really amazing. Byers is probably going to have to be the poster child of cranial blockage of the rectum. There's nobody who manages
RJ,
to.
He is not the poster child. He is the physical manifestation.
Embodiment of it. Yes, that's why his voice is so muffled, because it's kind of hard to talk when
he is the platonic.
I would love to have him on here once.
I don't think he's ever done videos. I think he only does postings on websites, of which everybody, Christine Janis had a big back and forth every time he shows up on one of the threads that she's in. She goes after him because she knows no one's going to argue mammal paleontology with Christine Janis and live to tell the tale.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Insane.
So Dapper's gonna go bite his head off.
I'm sorry, Dapper.
Don't blow your head up.
Oh, I tell you, that would be a scene of the giant theropod with the top hat going after Robert Byers. I think we'd pay good money to see that.
He sounds like the kind of guy who you don't argue with. You just send him local mental health institution pamphlets.
Yeah, you can check out my website. That if you can see Byers' comment there, and of course, you could anticipate my approach here. I would be going, oh, interesting argument. How do you account for the reptile mammal transition? Let's get to that. And his argument was spending a great deal of time not discussing that subject and veering off, repeating the same little shtick. He's not a detail fiddler. He's not like a standing for truth. He's not one of these that will have copied the jargon very carefully. Instead, he takes little snippets of this. And so I must say that Colton, you have documented that his brain has degenerated way beyond even what he was like a year ago.
Yeah, this gets worse.
He doesn't have a brain.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah, it's just, what the hell?
Stop your straw man.
What the hell?
His learning is recursive.
Yeah, just in case anybody don't, I'll put the thing up here. Robert Byers with a Y. That's the little fellow. And I'm sure if you Google him, you'll probably get umpteen different little variations on it. But he is notorious in there. And you got to give it to him. He must have like no life, because he just can be popping up constantly in website after website after website.
He might work at a job where he's basically just sitting on a computer all day, and
That's
so he
true.
just has time to,
Oh,
to
Peter popped in. Couldn't sleep, so hopping on for a bit. Hi to everybody.
Petre!
Yes, Peter.
Welcome back, Petre.
Yes. Oh, TD Lang says, Dapper Dino, to add to Vesta's point, brush and floss with Prometheum.
Just
Oh, yeah. Another thing Byers believes is that marsupials came off the ark as placentals and then all separately developed marsupial features individually.
Yeah, which is
I look
also an
forward to his monograph on that.
It's like he believes in hyper-evolution and hyper.
like seriously.
I'm fixing to argue with him right now, and I'm going to ask him, do you think genetics is real?
Oh,
So
please don't.
wait.
Please.
Colton. What does Byers deny? What is
No,
Byers?
I want to see if he denies genetics. I don't know if he does, but I'm pretty sure he does.
Can you list it all off again? Because I don't think
Okay. So here's all the crackpot shit that I know that Robert Byers believes. He doesn't think gravity is real. He doesn't think any known light source actually emits the light for some reason, but instead is channeling light from some ultra dimension from day one of creation.
What the fuck?
He thinks that all marsupials got off the ark as placentals and convergently evolved marsupial traits. I already said the gravity thing. He doesn't think dinosaurs are real. Any of them. He thinks they're all birds. I'm pretty sure including things like sauropods, they're still all birds.
What is his thoughts on mammals?
He doesn't believe mammals exist. He does not think mammal
Then
is
what the hell do you call me? What the hell do you call me?
He doesn't think
I'm a
reptiles
mammal.
exist. The only thing he thinks exists are birds, and that's because birds is a word explicitly mentioned in Genesis.
Whoa.
But it says beasts, not mammals. So
let me get this straight. He doesn't think that mammals, reptiles, amphibians,
or dinosaurs,
ever
and I'm pretty
exist.
sure fish are even a thing. Yeah.
You got to admit, Colton, he is up to date for science of 1485.
He also thinks that when you look at cave formation and you're asking how do caves form in limestone in a younger time frame, that you can look at how caves form in salt layers, even though it is completely different chemistry. And he says that's an appropriate comparison because it's like comparing the body plans of animals.
That's how his little mind works. Accent on the little.
Colton, if you can hear me, if you listen close, you can hear my neurons crawling. You can hear my neurons preparing to crawl up their own axons and die.
Yeah, I got to admit that you have teased out from Robert more of the stupid than I have observed in any of his previous postings.
Yeah, it gets bad.
I can feel my own neurons trying to crawl up their own axons to die.
I have never seen
I'm
Robert...
about to get into an argument with him about how fusion creates photons.
Has he? I'll test this out. I'm now very curious. Did he even try at any point to offer documentation, external sources for any of his arguments?
No, not at all.
No,
it doesn't surprise me.
Every other creationist that we see keeps saying, please, 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 for the love of Christ and all that is holy in his kingdom, shut your mouth. You are ruining everything.
Other creationists don't like him?
Yes.
Obviously.
They don't, by and large, they don't pay any attention to him.
RJ. Yeah. No, he didn't offer any positive evidence for precision. He did the classic.
Here's my claim. Just prove it.
He did the classic. Not my burden of proof, and told everybody else to either prove fire makes light or disprove.
He is quite literally saying that when you light a campfire, the campfire is not producing light. Bullshit. The light is coming from something else.
Something else.
And he's doing this to say that there's no distant starlight problem because light doesn't come from
there is
stars.
no distant starlight. Yeah, there we go.
I think Robert is the result.
You got to admit, it's a simplification of the system.
I think Robert is the result of a freak mutation that caused his brain to be replaced with a second rectum. Directly to his mouth.
You can see why he's been notorious, but this is like Christmas in April and May. That for all the stupid that Byers has done in various venues, this is like a whole new level of dumb.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
My brain
You're stuck
is
here with me, Jackson. You're not getting out of this.
Yeah.
Colton, my entire brain is trying to crawl up its own brainstem and die.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
That's what'll happen with dear old Byers. But it's always amusing to see when people play a source element game or a data floor game with him, as Christine Janis always does when she bumps into him or the various biologists and others. They'll be quizzing him, and you're kind of poking at him. And I poke at him from a source methods direction to say, I'm trying to get where, if anywhere, does he get any of this stuff from?
Nowhere. He has no source. It's whatever he makes up.
Yeah.
And he admits that. He admits that it's imagination and says, I have an excuse. You can't disprove it, so that means I'm right.
RJ, we have something from the chat. Call Me Emo says, actually, AIT has Megatherium and extant sloths being descendants of the same kind off the Ark. The same goes for Glyptodon and extant armadillos.
Somebody asked, would Kent Hovind like this light idea? Probably.
Then they are allowing an incredible amount of evolution.
They might as well just say,
they've got to keep the arc thing down because logically speaking, if all you needed was to have kinds, you could literally have all the species as kinds. There'd be no problem with it. You could just go the whole hog, and that way human beings are a specially created kind, and every single species is specially created, and then they would just kind of have to bother about the hybridization zones, and that's like Nephilim and angels breeding with people and so forth. They could resolve it that way. But
paper thin mixing.
Young Earth creationists have got to book the Noah's Ark trip. And that means they can't possibly put every single species on board. So they've got to whittle it down. And that's why they get into the bit that the more they try to fit. Woodmarap kind of wriggled around the problem because he was just writing a book. He didn't even offer.
This whole thing with Robert Byers. I mean, seriously.
He's just rolling over here. Poor pain. Just click on his username and just scroll through his profile and look at all of what he posts.
I can't. Error.
I broke something.
Yes, error. Tornado in a junkyard is no longer respawning. Please shut down and restart.
Just think if Kent Hovind
Please leave a message after the tone.
Festered for about a month. And then what you drag up with the sieve, that's Robert Byers.
And then you toss him down a flight of stairs. And yeah.
I think the hyper poo model that we were coming up with for the stratification might account for Robert Byers, however.
The hyper poo model. A fire can do it, yet it's not creating light, but only scratching a hole in the fabric and revealing light. All kinds of light being created can always be shown as only agents that poke into the light field behind some curtain. I don't even know what the hell he's saying.
Can we please Can we please propose the hyper poo model and float it at the next
floating it is
ICC
an accurate simile.
We should float it at the next ICC meeting.
Yes.
Under pseudonyms, of course.
Deadly Dakota Raptor says, "Damn it, Colton, you broke him."
Yeah, I did.
Tornado.
That you did.
And Brian Stevens says, "Emergency reboot protocol. Tornado bot 174.v4 engage."
A Byers.
I'm gonna click on this guy's profile.
Because I had not realized that Byers could be capable of such absolute hyperbolic twaddle.
It's bad.
Yeah, I think it's well. There's every once in a while I encounter a creationist that is in that mold of the making up shit as they go along creation.
Not even
that
stupid.
They just take little snippets, and I think from
so burden
if
shit.
I'm trying to get into Byers' brain, his obsessions with what is explicitly referred to in the Bible.
I got another post of his. Did dinosaurs ever exist or be created by God? No. It's a hilarious misclassification of unrelated creatures.
Okay, so a firebug can do it too, yet it's not creating light, only scratching a hole in the surface and revealing light. What the hell?
Yeah.
Drink. Prove it wrong or
remember all attempts to get him to write his monograph on the systematics of life according to his view of things has so far failed.
If I show him Darwin over here, what is he going to say?
He also seems to think that before Eve was created, Adam could just jack off and that would make another Adam.
Why do I want to see Robert Byers debate T-Jump?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Please, that would be a shit show, and I want to see it so badly.
RJ, why do you hate us?
Yeah, before this started, I was actually watching the debate between T-Jump and Godless Girl, and boy, T-Jump is insufferable.
I want to carve my brain out with a spoon after just looking at Robert's postings. What were they debating? Fuck?
Oh, they were debating something on the lines of the innate human instinct that at least some people have that there might be some sort of God, is that like evidence for anything? And I guess Godless Girl was trying to play devil's advocate, and T-Jump was just, oh my God, completely dodging all of her points. It was stupid.
Yeah.
Well, the best way to defeat an argument is to know your opponent. You know, be able to play devil's advocate.
And he doesn't know his opponent at all.
No, he doesn't really know much of anything. From what I've seen. So yeah, it's kind of sad.
As a certain project will delve into in future, there I think are perfectly natural evolutionary reasons why human beings have beliefs and why they also have religious beliefs.
He's the kind of person, like, if I was ever asked to do like a double team with him, I would say, okay, first of all, you and I are doing a hangout because we're gonna talk. You know?
Yeah, let's compare notes here first and try to get somewhere onto the same page.
I'm gonna write your script for you, and you're gonna read it.
Just the reading Robert Byers' postings. It's like watching a train wreck. I just can't look away, and then just reading the not just lack of information, but the total denial of anything.
There's another one. Must there be a way for great propulsion by man in a world without fossil fuels as it would have been pre-fall? Yes. So apparently we had like renewable energy for massive machines in the pre-flood world.
There we go. Yeah, wait. You see, we use pterodactyl wings for our wind generators.
No. I get what they used. They found a Stargate that was left behind by the ancients, and then they decided to hook it up to their generators so that whenever the Stargate decided to dial, they could siphon off the wormhole energy and thereby use it as a means to power their civilization.
And even another creationist immediately responds to him. What makes you think that in a perfect unfallen world, it would be God's will for us to move around really fast?
Wait. Whoa. Can you say that again?
So Byers says that I'm quoting him directly here, if there had not been the fall, and so the rightful, eternal, perfect universe for mankind to live in, Earth and space, then how would we move ourselves around fast as much as today and better if there was no fossil fuels like oil and gas? He's basically doing a hypothetical of how would we move around super duper fast with machines if we had never had the fall?
So let me get this straight.
Why do you think God wants us to do that?
Let me get this straight. Okay, the perfect God creates a world, including fossil fuels, knowing that human beings will fall and that they will get to be really persnickety and will have to destroy them in the flood. So he preemptively makes sure that Exxon and Shell have an adequate supply post-flood so that people can go around and travel around and come to see like Petra and Easter
North
Island,
Park.
and
Yes.
and that it makes perfect sense now.
No. I think I know how they would move super fast. It'd be the use of things like, oh gee,
Just use light engines.
Just use.
Well, remember that we do know that the koalas can be moved by volcanic catapult.
I swear I thought that
we
was
should
him
call
who
that,
wrote that.
we should call that like igneous transportation or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, just
Igneous Airlines.
What the hell? I can't even. Just,
I'm assuming that some people in the thread were occasionally trying to ask, where are you getting this from? And he invariably neglects to say.
No, he literally just keeps saying it's so blatantly clear. It's said by the Bible. No, it's not.
No, here's the thing. If I were to ask Robert Byers where he was getting this from, I would probably phrase it like, okay, are you joshing me right now, or is there some infinite well of unholy stupidity that you're drawing this from?
Dapper Dino asked, what's a light engine? Well, it's an engine with a lot of helium balloons attached.
That's a knee slapper.
Oh, is that what the Hindenburg was called?
Heck, I'm making as much sense as Byers here.
No, actually making more sense.
No. The Hindenburg was called a hair trigger bomb.
Oh.
God. I don't understand this dude. And it's like, does this not
if
raise
you ever
anybody's
do understand
suspicion?
Byers, seek medical attention at once.
I'm trying to get this question to you, Dapper. RJ, from Dapper, he asks if you saw his message, I assume, in the Twitter group about the creationists who thought that the South Park episode about making fun of creationists was mocking evolution.
Yeah.
I destroyed the solar system.
Travis Adams says, okay, that's a new one. Koalas riding volcanoes. Yes. I wish I were making this up, but Creation Wiki, creation.com.
Conservapedia.
Conservapedia, that was it. Conservapedia, which is the group that was founded by the son of Phyllis Schlafly, the hyper-conservative lawyer that died just a few years ago, and was also a Kent Hovind groupie. So there's the network of dumb.
RJ, please read out in the most sanctimonious voice you can, the most God voice you can do, Dapper's most recent message.
No, I'll do it. And thus were the koalas yeeted to Australia by a volcano.
Oh, you need a deeper resonant voice. You got to be able to do your
Let me try.
Let me try. And thus were the koalas yeeted to Australia by a volcano.
You got to rehearse your Charlton Heston. Behold his mighty hand. So you got to have that,
And thus were the koalas yeeted to Australia by a volcano.
You gotta have that. And then if you gather in a little bit of D. James Kennedy's sanctimony in there, that he's got an awful lot of that where. And thus were the koalas yeeted to Australia by a volcano. Yeah, so there are various modes you can go to, but yes, the impression, of course, is the little koala as it makes its little ballistic run.
No.
Here's the thing.
With the eucalyptus leaves, remember, the eucalyptus leaves were burped up simultaneously, and they were clutching the little eucalyptus trees while being hurled.
No, you've got it all wrong. RJ. The eucalyptus trees are actually used as rocket fuel to get the koalas into a high enough orbit so that their path wouldn't decay when they got to Australia.
Let's think really innovative. That the land that the koalas and eucalyptus leaves were on, right where the ark landed, it was blown as a complete unit. An Australia-sized landmass just went, so it just landed in one big splunk.
Okay, but then we have to introduce another problem because a lot of land hitting the ground really fast.
Well, now remember, God puts down like an airbag of like whatever it is that airbags would be doing if God were doing it, and that this is a temporary thing that only occurs when there is an air bagginess that comes in like the moon that arrives. There's a giant big air bagule that was like one of the moons of Jupiter, and it's brought in by the gravitational pull and is swung down at just the right moment to act as a puh when the thing lands. See, isn't now you see that?
Hold on.
We got the
Travis
data
Adams
here,
says Attenborough would work too, so I'm going to try my best Attenborough impression. And thus were the koalas yeeted to Australia by a volcano.
Indeed. Always have to add the indeed.
RJ, I love. Please do your Carl Sagan voice.
Oh, the billions and billions of galaxies, all of that stuff. Yeah.
The sound you're hearing is Carl Sagan rolling over in his grave.
I think we're just getting crazy here. It's all because Colton brought up David Byers. That is just made life terrible for us, young man.
My self-control is gone.
Yeah. Thank you, Colton. You're
Breaking
now
your brain.
Yes, thank you, Colton. You now owe therapy to at least 1 billion neurons.
No, I'm not paying for that.
My brain has melted. My mind is but a pasture.
Yeah.
Look, if I can't get rid of creationism, I'm just going to hurt other people with it.
Well, we've got a half hour over just on the Let's Browbeat David Byers show.
Robert Byers.
But yeah,
you broke RJ.
Because, Vesta Freya, Joe versus the volcano. This time Joe played by Skippy the kangaroo. Thank you, Vesta. Anyway, we're getting crazy here, so I think we should probably nip this one in the bud for another week.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just Colton, if you want to hurt anybody with Robert Byers, send him to the creationists.
We need
you'll melt their brains. They're already putty.
We need an entire evolution hour just devoted to Robert Byers.
I mean, honestly,
stupid shit he says.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
He is a useful illustration.
I'm gonna tell you what. I'm gonna try to get into an argument with him with how photons are produced, and I'll let you know how it goes.
I have a way that photons could be produced. See, it doesn't even require.
And ask him if you can make a torpedo out of photons.
Yes.
Hold on, I'm going to say this. It doesn't even require stars or a fire. It just requires metal to be heated to such a ridiculous degree that the electrons jump from higher energy levels to lower energy levels and thus give off photons.
Oh, you will have lost Robert by that point.
No,
what are you talking about, boy?
Yeah, basically, to Robert Byers, if you're listening to this and you come across this video, I want you to listen to this very carefully. One method of creating photons is to heat a sort of metal up really, really hot, such as, I don't know, iron. And as the electrons jump from the higher energy level to a lower energy level, they will give off a photon, which has a peak emission wavelength.
That won't matter. That won't matter, Tornado. See, the thing about Tornado, when Robert gets involved with people who actually know their shit, whether it's Christine Janis in biology or Heron in paleontology and Heron in biology and all the rest, and they start going into details, Robert just kind of backs off. And then like a day or two later, is there like pulses to Robert? Because in other threads that I've seen, he'll like go a while and then he'll kind of disappear and then he'll pop back in, repeating the same things he did before as if he's never done that before. And everybody that knows him of going, this again.
Yeah, that's essentially what he does.
Yeah. But I got to admit, he has kept this particular array of stupid mercifully not in the discussions. This is really quite amazing. So you are performing a perverse a scholarly duty here in kind of, it's like you've taken like a pitchfork.
Is it really scholarship, RJ? Because this is so low
true.
brow.
But the point is, it's like you've just taken this big hay blob of stupid and you've been going poop, poke, poke, and it's getting all fluffed up, and all of these new levels of stupid are being thrown out that we wouldn't have ever spotted before.
Yep.
Yeah,
No.
that's masochism.
That's not a scholarly work. That is you ramming your head into a brick wall and listening as your axons curl up as your
That might be
neurons-
how you view it. I have fun with this.
Yeah,
we can
I'm
have a
I
whole
was just
discipline, a sub-discipline of Byersology, which
reading
is the,
Robert
the
Byers.
systematics and taxonomy of Byersism.
I have never heard my neurons cry out for mercy before the way they did
Well,
tonight.
then
Thank
don't
you.
then don't bump into Robert Byers for that. There's a certain continuity to your Nephilims and your standing for truths, which of course they're detail fiddler types, But Byers has his own little strange little world. It's
Yes,
a
his
different
own
world.
canon.
It's a different world from James. Oh, that's enough. There would be a discussion. Could we have a philosophical discussion between Robert Byers and James Cole? That would be one that we could just get.
Let's
just
have
sit
a
them, lock them in
discussion.
a room, and not let them out until they have resolved the secrets of the universe. Because remember, it's all light to Cole, and then light doesn't really exist in Byers's view. So this could be really interesting to watch.
Would it be interesting to watch me and Byers go at it hammer and tongs?
Oh, be sure your hammer is well assembled and your tongs are well sharpened.
Yeah.
All right.
He's-
Okay, I
Mel
think
needs to go,
we
though.
have definitely exhausted this
Everything is kinda
subject. Scientist Mel, play us out and put up the advert for whatever you have there for the end game, and we can say bye until next week, because otherwise we're just going to spend the rest of our time spitting spittle about Robert Byers.
All right, see you guys next time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't go a while. Wow.
Why do you have to talk to
I don't think he's not at that level. He's just a little crank that comes in there and is ever so confident. And
But he doesn't. It's not bad enough that he doesn't know. He doesn't just not know what he's talking about. It's worse because